Order, order. Questions to the Secretary of State for Scotland, Bob Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number one, sir.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, as my right honourable friend the Prime Minister has made clear, we believe Scotland is stronger in the United Kingdom and the United Kingdom is stronger with Scotland in it. Leading up to the referendum, the Government will produce detailed evidence and analysis to assess the benefits that Scotland gains from being part of the United Kingdom and the contribution that Scotland makes to our United Kingdom.
Stewart.
I thank the Secretary of State for that answer, but would the Secretary of State agree with me that the defence of Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland would be greatly enhanced rather than have a separate Scotland? And defence matters to this country, the whole of this country, greatly.
State.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very, very important point, and indeed over the next 18 months civil servants will be preparing detailed analysis and evidence which will show the basis of the arguments that we need to be involved in as Scotland confronts this great debate. And fundamentally, protecting our citizens is one of the most important parts of our role in government. We also want to look at our position in the world and the economic benefits that we get as being part of the United Kingdom.
Mr. Angus Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State and his Tory and Labour allies in the anti-independence coalition all say So the Secretary of State, his Tory and Labour allies in the anti-independence coalition say they all believe that the constitutional status quo is not sustainable. So with only days to go until the formal launch of the No campaign, could you please outline to the House what joint proposals they have for further devolution, what powers will be devolved and when?
I do hope that the honourable gentleman hasn't got himself into trouble for mentioning the independence word, but he's a brave guy, so perhaps he thought it was a risk worth taking. Can I say to him it's a bit rich of him to come here and ask questions of us, having just delivered the biggest transfer of financial powers from London to Scotland since the Act of Union, when every time we ask him what independence means, his proposals unravel.
Angus Robertson.
The last time I looked, this was Scottish questions to the Secretary of State and the UK Government. So for a second time, can I ask him, given that he and his allies say that the constitutional status quo is not sustainable, what specific joint proposals do they have for the further devolution of powers? He didn't answer it the first time I asked the question. Can he please answer it now?
I thought that the honourable gentleman's party had belatedly and even grudgingly welcomed the fact that the Scotland Act has now set in place the biggest transfer of financial powers through borrowing, the Scottish rate of income tax, the transfer of stamp duty, land tax north of the border. Can I say to him that the debate that he refers to that we all need to get on with is the one about independence? That's why the UK Government is absolutely committed to ensuring we get the evidence and the analysis, working with experts, academics and other outside bodies to ensure we are equipped for this great debate across the country.
Sir Mingus Campbell.
Does my right honourable friend consider that Scotland being part of the United Kingdom is an important benefit in any international trade disputes? I particularly have in mind, some years ago, the efforts of the United States to restrict the import of the exports from his own constituency of the finest quality cashmere goods in a dispute about bananas. Was the fact that Scotland was part of the United Kingdom an important factor in ensuring a proper resolution of that issue?
My right honourable and learned friend is absolutely right. It was critical to us in the borders and indeed to the producers of luxury goods the length and breadth of Scotland that we were part of the United Kingdom. We had great clout within the European Union and then could negotiate within the World Trade Organization to get the right outcome. And our position in the world, the protection of our citizens and the future of our economy, these are the three key strands we will now be looking at to make sure we are well informed in this great debate.
Davidson.
Mr. Speaker, we have heard it here first. The launch of the campaign, separatists for devolution. That's it, isn't it? They don't like it, the word separation. They don't like the word independence. And in fact, they want to leave Britain in order to make us more British. full of rubbish. What a ludicrous set of proposals.
I think there was a question mark somewhere. Secretary of State.
Can I say I agree with the honourable gentleman?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What representations has my right honourable friend had on whether an independent Scotland would wish to join the euro?
None, but that is a matter for the Scottish National Party and the Scottish Government to set out its proposals. It singularly failed to do so.
Margaret Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State, I think, may be aware that I received answers to parliamentary questions yesterday that indicated that although the Scottish Government argue that a separate Scotland will continue to use sterling, perhaps, the Bank of England, perhaps, and indeed UK regulatory finance institutions, they have not yet undertaken any work behind the scenes in order to explore these options. No correspondence sent, no questions asked, no discussions taking place. Perhaps he agrees with me that the First Minister should spend less time in Hollywood and more time in Holyrood. Given that the Scottish, it was a good try, given that the Scottish Government have made these statements about the economy in a separate Scotland, can I ask the Secretary of State what steps he has taken, particularly in relation to the Scottish economy, to clear up confusion of ambiguity and claims around these issues?
Secretary of State.
I agree with the honourable lady that it is quite striking that the Scottish National Party, the Scottish Government, as they set out what has been their lifelong ambition to create an independent Scotland, are curiously short on the detail and aren't very curious to ask more questions about it. I start from a very simple point, that Scotland is stronger within the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom is stronger for having Scotland part of it, and the economy is a key part of that argument.
Karen.
I thank the Secretary of State for that argument, because I think we are very clear in Scotland that in fact what we've got is we don't have argument, we have assertion, we have fact rather than fantasy, and even the arguments from the Scottish Government cannot pass the most basic tests of credible evidence. Therefore, can I ask the Secretary of State and indeed the whole UK Government that they can work with others to ensure that we do have credible evidence, argument that passes the test of objective and independent scrutiny to ensure Scottish people get the arguments they deserve.
Secretary of State.
I absolutely agree with the honourable lady that it is important that this great debate is well informed by detailed evidence and strong analysis. That's why we are getting civil servants to work through the key issues, to engage with academics, think tanks and other respected experts outside government to ensure that we have all the evidence to inform that debate. I'm confident that as we do that over the next 18 months, we will show beyond doubt that Scotland's place is much stronger as part of the UK.
Gilmore.
Question number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I'm in regular contact with the Scottish Government on a range of issues. Later this week, the British-Irish Council is due to discuss the effectiveness of programmes and policies to support youth employment in members' respective administrations.
Sheila Gilmore.
Last week in the Scottish Parliament, what the Labour spokesperson on youth unemployment, Kezia Dugdale MSP, uncovered figures that showed that the 25,000 modern apprenticeships the Scottish Government is claiming to have set up, over 10,000 of them were people who were already in work. And would the Minister agree with me that the Scottish Government should be spending public money creating additional jobs, not just rebadging jobs?
I share the honourable lady's concerns about the way in which the Scottish Government seeks to present facts, but the facts are quite clear in relation to their responsibilities on employment matters. They have had £22 million additional monies in relation to youth contract consequentials, and I'd like to see them focusing on how they spend that money rather than their obsession with the Constitution.
I entirely understand, but I'd like to see greater brevity from now on to be exemplified by the honourable lady, the member for Epping Forest, Mrs. Eleanor Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Minister aware that almost every economic analysis shows beyond doubt that employment prospects in Scotland would be significantly reduced if Scotland became a country separate from the United Kingdom?
I absolutely agree with the Honourable Lady, who I'm sure will welcome with me the fact that employment in Scotland has increased by 18,000 in the last period.
I'm sure, like me, the Minister has witnessed this ridiculous and scurrilous campaign by the Labour Party against what is undoubtedly one of the most successful modern apprenticeship schemes in Scotland. And seemingly their complaint is based on rules that they introduced and set themselves. Should the Minister instead congratulate the Scottish Government for almost doubling the number of modern apprenticeships in the last year, and also the extra £72 million of investment that we saw?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do notice that the Honourable Member didn't mention the word independence, so he's obviously on message. What I have to say in relation to employment and youth unemployment in Scotland is that the UK Government and the Scottish Government should work together on these issues.
Ian McKenzie.
Question number 3, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 3 and 5 together. This Government is committed to creating the right environment for sustained economic growth to provide the basis for the creation of secure jobs.
Ian McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It should come as no surprise to the Secretary of State that unemployment in Scotland is absolutely at crisis levels. It's still unacceptable numbers of unemployment and disgraceful numbers of youth unemployed. In fact, if it were not for my council in Inverclyde... We just need a question.
The Honourable Member.
Can I press upon the Secretary of State and his government to make unemployment figures, reduction of those figures, absolute priority in Scotland? And will he join...
We're grateful, but we must move on. Secretary of State.
Listen, I agree with the Honourable Gentleman. We must do everything we can to reduce unemployment, particularly youth unemployment, which, as he will recall, began to rise in the periods of growth under the last Labour government. We have, through our measures in the work programme, the youth contract, and through the work we've been doing jointly with the Scottish Government, bearing down on this. And I'm happy to meet with him to discuss that further if he wishes.
Mr. Osborne.
Mr. Speaker, is the Secretary of State aware that the Scottish Chambers of Commerce have today called for an expansion of investment in infrastructure to help Scottish businesses? What will he do to make sure this happens?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, she needs to recognise the very serious steps that we are taking to get the economy back on a secure path to growth after what we inherited from her government 2 years ago, and also bearing in mind the crisis we see in other parts of Europe. By cutting corporation tax, by keeping interest rates as low as possible, and with specific measures for Scotland, including the enterprise areas in Irvine, Nig and in Dundee, we are taking action to help the Scottish economy.
Oliver Heald.
Does the Minister agree with me that by cutting corporation tax, by reducing regulation and at the same time having the largest work programme the country's ever seen, we are succeeding in Scotland with 14,000 less unemployed this month, the 3rd month in a row?
I certainly welcome the reduction in unemployment, but I think we need to recognise that things are going to continue to be challenging for people the length and breadth of Scotland and the rest of the UK. But he is right. The measures we are taking to get the economy back on the right track are fundamentally right, and they are the way in which we will create secure jobs.
Sir Robert Smith.
Mr. Speaker, does the Secretary of State recognise that Statoil's decision to invest in the North Sea in a further 300 jobs for Aberdeen is a recognition that the new positive approach taken by the Treasury to encourage investment is bearing fruit?
Well, my honourable friend is right that in the energy sector we've had significant announcements from Statoil, from BP, from Gamesa and others on the future of Scotland's energy needs, not just in oil and gas but elsewhere. I think they recognise that that is an important part of what this government is committed to, and that Scotland is better as being part of the UK in delivering that.
Stuart Hosey. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad the Secretary of State welcomed the 14,000 fall in unemployment. That's very good news. I'm sure you also want to welcome the news today on foreign direct investment into Scotland creating jobs. But of course he's right, we must create the right environment for businesses to employ people. That means downward pressure on costs, particularly on fuel prices, which are recognised to be one of the most significant cost pressures businesses face. So will he take this opportunity today to speak to his colleagues in the Treasury to cancel the fuel duty rise planned for this August?
Grateful. Secretary of State.
I would just point out to the Honourable Gentleman, thanks to the action this government has taken in introducing the fuel duty stabiliser and abandoning the escalator we inherited from the opposite, for the party opposite, we are doing a lot to help motorists, and we'll continue to do that.
Mind the House that the clue is in the heading. Questions to the Secretary of State for Scotland. Mr. William Bain.
Mr. Speaker. Listening to the Secretary of State reminds us how totally isolated he is in Scotland in believing that the answer to this crisis of weak economic demand is harsher austerity over the next 4 years. Does he not accept that nearly twice as many people as on Black Wednesday are being forced to work part-time because there aren't enough full-time jobs in our economy? 320,000 people in Scotland are struggling below the poverty line despite being in work, and real wages have fallen every month this government has been in office. Isn't this the real explanation of why we face a double-dip recession made in Downing Street?
I may suit the honourable gentleman's case, but he cannot be allowed to forget the legacy of his government and the mess that we inherited 2 years ago, nor can they be allowed to be blinkered about the challenges around Europe and the world. What we're doing is ensuring we create the right financial and economic conditions to ensure that we get Scotland and the UK's economy back on the right foot.
Well, Amber Rudd.
Oh, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I regularly meet with representatives of the Scottish agricultural industry, including the National Farmers Union for Scotland and individual producers. I look forward to further direct engagement tomorrow when I attend the Royal Highland Show.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for that answer. Does the Minister agree that those in the Scottish agricultural sector are better off with Scotland remaining part of the UK?
I absolutely agree with the Honourable Lady, Mr. Speaker. An independent Scotland would shrink our home market of 60 million consumers to a mere 5 million overnight. Farmers would be reliant on exporting their produce. 64% of Scottish beef was sold to the rest of the UK at a first point of delivery in 2011.
Mike Weir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps the Minister could try answering your question. It's actually the responsibility of the UK Government. Is he aware of the huge concern amongst Scottish agriculture and horticulture over the future of the seasonal agricultural workers scheme due to expire next year? And has he made representations to the Home Office for the continuation of the scheme?
I note, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman's concerns on the issue, and I'd be happy to meet with him to discuss them further.
Mr. Michael Connaughton.
Number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I meet with Scottish ministers regularly to discuss a range of issues. On the 15th of March, Scottish ministers joined me in Dundee for a joint government summit to discuss youth unemployment in Scotland, and we agreed to continue to work together on this very important issue.
Michael Connaughton.
Mr. Speaker, with the information that there's falsification going on in the apprenticeship schemes, with people already in work being counted as new apprentices, with the offshore oil industry saying that they need 44% of the people with non-graduate technical skills to fill the spaces that are coming up in their industry, is it not time the Secretary of State showed some leadership and called an all-party, all-parliament forum in Scotland about unemployment and stop this behaviour of the SNP running a single party state with their ministers wandering around having one party meeting?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, I appreciate the length of time he has spent working on this particular issue over his political career. I also believe it's important that the parties can work together, because the origins of youth unemployment lie elsewhere rather than just under this government's tenure. I'm very happy to work with him and others to make sure we get all the best ideas focused on tackling youth unemployment.
Swinson.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Secretary of State's recent visit to my constituency's largest employer, Aviva in Bishopbriggs, with 1,100 staff, and his support for my Get Eastern Bartonshire Working Initiative, which since the end of April has helped to create 43 new employment and training opportunities in the local area. What more can the government do to ensure businesses are aware of the support that is available, particularly through the £1 billion youth contract, to employ especially young people?
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for the opportunity to visit with her the Aviva offices in her constituency and pay tribute to them for the work they're doing with their young people and others. I think it's very, very important that we do all we can to support young people. That's why the youth contract is now in place, boosting work experience, increasing the number of wage incentives that are available, and helping to ensure the Scottish Government has support for more.
There's plenty of scope for an adjournment. different debate, I think. Brian Donohoe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State recently visited my constituency. I wonder if he can give us a progress report on how he's got on with the Schools Industry Liaison Committees.
I regret to inform the honourable gentleman I have not made as much progress as he would wish me to do. I hope, however, he will recognise the important support we have given to Irvine in the form of the enterprise allowances. The 100% capital allowance is now available there, but I'll be happy to catch up with him on the school industry partnership and the Scottish Government role in it any time soon.
Stuart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that the plans to reform employment law will encourage particularly small businesses to take on more young people?
Well, as my honourable friend knows, the employment law review is something that will carry on through this Parliament. I look forward to seeing what proposals come forward in due course.
Mr. Tom Clark.
Number 7, Mr. Speaker.
The Government is committed to ensuring consumers get the best deal for their energy usage and has put in place measures to help reduce household energy bills. In May, I held a summit in Rutherglen bringing together the big 6 energy suppliers, Scottish consumer groups and the regulator Ofcom Ofgem to examine ways to address this issue.
Mr. Speaker, since the last 8 years, the average energy prices have increased by 140% per household, whereas the average income for households is a mere 20%. What is the government doing to respond to people's worries, especially elderly people, people with disabilities and low-income families, to deal with what is now an onslaught on vulnerable people?
Mr. Speaker, well, of course, the Government is continuing with cold weather payments and the winter fuel payments and is bringing forward the Green Deal. We're also working with voluntary organisations across Scotland to help them help support the most vulnerable to get access to all the benefits that are available to them for fuel issues.
Alan Reid.
Mr. Speaker, many islanders are telling me that the 5p fuel duty discount is not being passed on to the motorist. Will the Minister speak to HMRC and the OFT and ask them to investigate, because they must make sure that this discount is passed on to the motorist in its entirety?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very concerned to hear what the honourable member has to say on that issue, and certainly I'll be very happy to meet with him and other concerned island MPs to discuss it.
Mr. Edward Lee.
Number 8, sir.
Mr. Speaker, as the coalition agreement sets out, we are committed to a review of public funding arrangements once we have dealt with the unprecedented deficit we inherited from the previous government.
Mr. Edward Lee.
Whilst you would have to have an intelligence as profound as a Spinoza to understand central government funding of Scotland, isn't one thing clear to even the most basic English person? Not only do we have no say over education and health in Scotland, but they run ours, but we pay over the odds for theirs. Perhaps the SNP should be careful what they wish for when they call for independence.
If I might say to my right honourable friend that he, more than most, understands the complexities of public spending in this country. But if I might say to him, our priority has to be to reduce the deficit. We can then look again at these issues. But I would gently point out to him that within England there are quite large variations, and the figure per head of spending in London is higher than that in Scotland.
Mr. Ian Murray.
Mr. Speaker, given that the Scottish Government have had no discussions with either the Chancellor or the Bank of England on to have a place on the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee, which would be a committee of a foreign country, does the Secretary of State agree with me that this is another fanciful assertion that comes to Scottish people?
I think the honourable gentleman is entirely right to highlight yet again the assertions that are made by the Scottish Government rather than any detailed evidence and analysis, which is what we are now as a government determined to provide for this great debate. They seem to be willing and able to swap a good partnership for some kind of new dependency. That's not right.
Dr. Ailey Whiteford.
Question number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the UK Government has worked hard to influence the content of the general approach at Fisheries Council. It would deliver positive benefits for Scotland's fisheries and those who depend on them. I welcome its commitments to manage fish stocks sustainably, more moves towards more regionalised fisheries management, and ensure that discards are eliminated.
To Ailey Whiteford.
Mr. Speaker, I also welcome the progress that was made in Luxembourg last week. But
can I ask the Minister if he thinks that this is an appropriate juncture in the process to introduce more transparency into fisheries management by the UK Government making public the individuals and companies that hold fish stock, fish quota here?
Minister. What I think I agree with the Honourable Lady on is that it is important that the UK Government and Scottish Government work well together, and the recent Fisheries Council is a very good example of both governments working together in that way for the benefit of Scotland's fishermen.
Ms Anne McIntosh.
The Honourable Lady is absolutely right. We need a register of active fishermen to show...
The House must come to order. The House should be listening to the Chair of the Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee, listening with respect. Ms McIntosh.
And fisheries. The Honourable Lady is absolutely right. Without a register, we do not know who are active fishermen in Scotland and who are slipper skippers.
Well, Mr Speaker, the ministers both here in the UK Government and in the Scottish Government will have heard the Honourable Lady's comments as a respected contributor on such matters.
Mr Tom Greatrix.
Number 11, Mr Speaker.
I have met with representatives of the Scotland-Malawi partnership to discuss the best way for the UK Government to mark this bicentenary. The Scotland office will hold a commemorative event at Dover House. My officials will work with other interested parties to ensure this anniversary is celebrated across the UK.
Tricks. Thank the Minister for his reply. Would he also join with me in supporting my invitation to the President of Malawi, Joyce Banda, to visit the UK during the bicentenary, and indeed as part of that visit to come to Blantyre, Lanarkshire in my constituency?
Can I commend, Mr Speaker, the Honourable Member for the role he has played in promoting the David Livingstone bicentenary, which has great resonance in his constituency, and yes, the Scotland office will work with him and others to encourage the President of Malawi to come to Scotland.